HMP Manchester, Strangeways. A prison so notorious, prisoners once burned it to the ground, rebuilt, reinforced, and still running. It has housed some of the most violent offenders Britain has ever produced. This is the most dangerous inmate it has ever had. Harold Frederick Shipman was born on January 14, 1946, in Nottingham. The son of a lorry driver, he was close to his mother, Vera, who died of lung cancer when he was 17. Her final days eased by morphine injections from a family doctor. Shipman studied medicine at Leeds, qualified in 1970, and eventually built a thriving general practice in Hyde, Greater Manchester, where patients waited a year to join his list. He was regarded as devoted, thorough, and kind. He exploited every part of that reputation. For over 2 decades, he visited elderly patients, mostly women, at home, injected them with lethal doses of diamorphine, then falsified their death certificates to read old age or heart failure. Families buried their loved ones without question. At the peak of his killing, his female patients were dying at a rate 2,200 times the national average. Nobody looked. His final overreach destroyed him. After taking the life of 81-year-old Kathleen Grundy on June 24, 1998, he forged her will to name himself sole beneficiary of £386,000. Grundy's daughter, a solicitor, immediately suspected. The body was exhumed. Diamorphine was found in lethal quantities. Shipman was arrested in September 1998 and held on remand at HMP Manchester whilst the case against him was assembled. On January 31, 2000, he was convicted of 15 counts of murder and sentenced to life with a whole life order. He never confessed, never explained, and never showed remorse. A government inquiry later concluded he had taken at least 215 lives across 23 years, with suspicion extending to as many as 284 deaths. On January 13, 2004, one day before his 58th birthday, Harold Shipman hanged himself in his cell using bedsheets. He remains the most prolific confirmed serial killer in modern British history. Dale Cregan was born on June 6, 1983, in Tameside, Greater Manchester. Known in criminal circles as One Eye, his left eye missing under circumstances he never fully explained. Cregan began dealing cannabis as a teenager, and by his 20s was clearing a reported £20,000 a week selling cocaine. He was fiercely loyal to the Atkinson criminal family, whose decade-long feud with the Short family of Manchester would eventually pull him into 4 murders across 4 months. On May 25, 2012, Cregan entered the Cotton Tree pub in Droylsden and opened fire with a pistol. Mark Short, 23, was taken. 3 others were wounded. Cregan was arrested, questioned, and released on bail. He used his freedom to plan his next act. On August 10, 2012, he tracked Mark Short's father, David Short, 46, to his home in Clayton, shooting him multiple times and then detonating a hand grenade against his dying body. The first grenade murder in British history. Greater Manchester Police launched its largest ever manhunt. More than 100 addresses were raided. Cregan was nowhere to be found. On September 18, 2012, he dialed 999 and reported a fictitious burglary at an address in Hattersley, Tameside. When PC's Fiona Bone, 32, and Nicola Hughes, 23, arrived on routine patrol, Cregan was waiting inside, armed with a Glock pistol and a hand grenade. He fired 32 shots in 31 seconds, then threw the grenade at their bodies. Both officers died. An hour later, Cregan walked into Hyde Police Station and surrendered. He was held on remand at HMP Manchester. On June 13, 2013, at Preston Crown Court, Dale Cregan was sentenced to a whole life order for 4 murders, one of the rarest and most severe sentences in British law. Ian Brady was born Ian Duncan Stewart on January 2, 1938, in Glasgow. Illegitimate, and abandoned by his mother days after birth. He was raised by a foster family in the Gorbals, one of Glasgow's most deprived neighborhoods. By 13, he had 3 convictions for housebreaking. At 17, he moved to Manchester, where he was caught stealing lead seals from Smithfield Market and sentenced to 3 months at HMP Manchester, then called Strangeways. That stretch gave him his first real experience of prison. It would not deter him. Obsessed with Nazism and the philosophy of the Marquis de Sade, Brady came to believe that conventional morality was a constraint invented for the weak. In 1961, he began a relationship with Myra Hindley, a 19-year-old secretary. Within months, she was entirely under his influence. Between July 1963 and October 1965, Brady and Hindley abducted, tortured, and took the lives of 5 children and teenagers across Greater Manchester: Pauline Reed, 16, John Kilbride, 12, Keith Bennett, 12, Leslie Ann Downey, 10, and Edward Evans, 17. They buried the bodies on Saddleworth Moor. An audio recording of Leslie Ann Downey pleading for her life was played in court. The judge described them as 2 sadistic killers of the utmost depravity. On May 6, 1966, Brady was convicted of 3 murders and sentenced to life imprisonment, the only 3 killings for which physical evidence was sufficient. He spent 19 years in mainstream prisons before being transferred to Ashworth High Security Hospital in 1985. He went on repeated hunger strikes demanding the right to die. He never disclosed the location of Keith Bennett's body. His remains have never been found. Ian Brady died of natural causes on May 15, 2017 at Ashworth Hospital. He was 79. Keith Bennett's family are still searching. Thomas Edward Cashman was born on September 4, 1988, in Liverpool. He left school at 13 and began dealing drugs, eventually building a cocaine operation, earning between £3,000 and £5,000 a week. He had 18 previous convictions, covering 33 separate offenses. On the evening of August 22, 2022, Cashman was hunting Joseph Nee, a 35-year-old organized crime figure, through a residential area of Devcott, Liverpool. Nee was fleeing on foot. He ran towards Kingsheath Avenue and attempted to force his way into a terraced house. The front door was opened from inside by Carol Corbell, 46. Standing directly behind her was her 9-year-old daughter, Olivia Pratt Corbell. Cashman fired 4 shots. 1 bullet passed through Cheryl's hand and entered Olivia's chest. Nee, the intended target, survived and walked away. Olivia was rushed to Alderhay Children's Hospital and declared deceased that night. She was 9 years old. The nation was devastated. Her face appeared on front pages across the country. Her killing became a rallying point in the national conversation about gang violence and the price paid by innocent people caught in its path. Cashman fled and denied being the gunman. Forensic evidence connected both firearms recovered at his home directly to the shooting. On March 30, 2023, he was convicted of Olivia's murder, the attempted murder of Joseph Nee, the wounding of Cheryl Corbell, and 2 firearms offenses at Manchester Crown Court. On April 26, 2023, at Liverpool Crown Court, Thomas Cashman was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 42 years. He was 34 years old. Olivia Pratt Corbell was 9. Kieran Stapleton was from Salford, Greater Manchester. In the early hours of December 26, 2011, Boxing Day, he was walking through Ordsall Lane, Salford, when he encountered a group of Indian postgraduate students from Lancaster University who had come to Manchester to celebrate the holiday. One of them was Anuj Bidve, 23, an engineering student from Pune, India, who had arrived in England just months earlier, full of plans for his future. Bidve's friends would later say they had done nothing, said nothing, drawn no attention. They were simply walking. Stapleton approached, produced a handgun, pointed it directly at Anuj Bidve's head, and fired a single shot. Bidve collapsed on the pavement. He died in hospital shortly after. He was 23 years old. No motive was ever established. When Stapleton appeared at Manchester City Magistrates Court on January 2, 2012, he introduced himself to the court as Kieran "Psycho" Stapleton. The statement drew national outrage and a response from the Indian government, which demanded answers. Anuj Bidvai's parents had flown from India to follow every hearing. Stapleton was 20 years old. He was tried at Manchester Crown Court, where the prosecution described the killing as a random, premeditated act with no conceivable justification. He claimed Bidvai had made a remark. The jury rejected this entirely. On July 26, 2012, Kieran Stapleton was convicted of murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 30 years. Parole not eligible until July 27, 2042. The judge described it as a cold-blooded murder for absolutely no reason. Stapleton was held at HMP Manchester following his conviction. Paul Taylor was an inmate at Strangeways, HMP Manchester, in the spring of 1990. On April 1, 1990, a Palm Sunday service was underway in the prison chapel. When Taylor seized the microphone from the prison chaplain, Reverend Noel Proctor, and addressed the congregation directly, he spoke about resentment, anger, and what he described as the deliberate destruction of human beings by the prison system. What followed was the longest prison riot in British history. Prisoners rushed the chapel, overwhelmed staff, and seized control of the roof. Taylor became the public face of the protest, appearing on the rooftop, attempting to shout demands to the crowds gathered below, while police sirens drowned him out, and unfurling a banner reading "We fight and stand firm on behalf of humanity." The riot lasted 25 days. One prisoner on remand, Derek White, died of injuries sustained during the chaos. 147 staff and 47 prisoners were injured. The cost of rebuilding Strangeways exceeded £80 million. It was rebuilt and officially reopened as HMP Manchester in 1994. The Wolf inquiry that followed led to some of the most significant prison reform legislation in British history, fundamentally reshaping conditions and rights across the entire prison estate. Taylor and fellow ringleader Alan Lord were charged with the murder of Derek White. Both were acquitted, the eyewitness testimony deemed unreliable, and the possibility that White had died from a pre-existing thrombotic condition could not be excluded. Taylor was convicted of rioting and separately pleaded guilty to conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. He received a 3-year sentence. The riot he helped ignite changed British prisons permanently. Paul Quinn was living in Little Hulton, Greater Manchester, in the summer of 2003. On a night in July of that year, he attacked a young woman in the area with extreme violence, choking her, raping her twice, and causing her serious bodily harm before leaving. The original Greater Manchester police investigation that followed produced a wrongful arrest and wrongful conviction. Andrew Malkinson, an innocent man, was convicted of Quinn's crime in 2004 and sentenced to 7 years. When Malkinson refused to admit guilt at every parole hearing, his sentence stretched further. He spent 17 years in total inside before his conviction was finally quashed by the Court of Appeal in 2023. Quinn, the real perpetrator, knew throughout every one of those years that an innocent man was serving time for what he had done. He said nothing. In 2022, a full DNA profile matching Quinn was recovered from the vest top the individual had been wearing on the night of the attack. Quinn was arrested and interviewed. He denied the attack, claiming to have slept with multiple women around that time to explain the DNA. Investigators then matched a second DNA sample at a statistical probability described in court as 1 billion times more likely to be his than anyone else's. Witness accounts placed him at the scene. The case was rebuilt from scratch. Over 6,000 documents assessed, 760 exhibits reviewed, 275 witness statements obtained. On April 17, 2026, at Manchester Crown Court, Paul Quinn, 52, was unanimously found guilty of 2 counts of rape, 1 count of choking with intent, and 1 count of grievous bodily harm. His sentencing date had not yet been confirmed at the time of writing. Andrew Malkinson called him a coward. The victim described the verdict as long overdue. Lucy Letby was born on January 4, 1990, in Hereford, England, an only child. Those who knew her growing up described her as quiet, studious, and driven. She was the first in her family to attend university, enrolling in nursing at the University of Chester, completing placements at Liverpool Women's Hospital and in the Countess of Chester Hospital during her training. She graduated in September 2011. By January 2012, she was a registered nurse, working full-time in the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital in Cheshire, a ward for the most premature and critically unwell newborns in the region. Colleagues remembered her as dedicated. She worked overtime voluntarily and took salsa dance classes in her spare time. She seemed, by every outward measure, unremarkable. In June 2015, something shifted. The neonatal unit began recording an abnormal number of sudden infant collapses and deaths, far beyond the 2 or 3 per year considered typical. 4 collapses occurred in a single month, 3 of them fatal. Lead neonatologist, Dr. Stephen Brary, noted a pattern. Letby had been present at every single incident. Concerns were raised internally and repeatedly. Hospital executives dismissed them. When doctors escalated their concerns again in 2016, management instructed them to apologize to LETB for the suggestion. She was not removed from clinical duties until June 2016, after 2 premature triplet brothers, babies O and P, died under her care in the same month. The incidents stopped the moment she left the ward. Police were not contacted until May 2017. LETB was arrested in July 2018, released, arrested again in 2019, and formally charged in November 2020. The methods described at trial were calculated and varied. She injected air into the bloodstreams of infants, causing fatal embolisms. She administered insulin to newborns who had no clinical reason to receive it. She overfed babies through nasogastric tubes, flooding their stomachs. She physically assaulted infants and dislodged their breathing tubes. She removed confidential handover sheets from the hospital, documents later described as potential mementos. At her home, investigators found handwritten notes in her own hand. Among them, "I am evil, I did this, and I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough to care for them." She pleaded not guilty to every charge. Her trial at Manchester Crown Court began in October 2022 and ran for almost a year, one of the longest murder trials in British history. On August 18, 2023, the jury convicted her of 7 counts of murder and 6 counts of attempted murder. She received 14 whole life orders. A retrial on 1 remaining count of attempted murder followed in July 2024, at which she was again convicted, a 15th whole life order imposed. Lucy Letby is the most prolific serial killer of children in modern British history. Only 3 other women in the UK have ever received a whole life order. She maintains her innocence, and as of April 2026, a review by the Criminal Cases Review Commission remains ongoing. She is currently held at a high-security women's facility, serving a sentence from which she will never be released. Hashem Abedi was born in Manchester in 1997 to Libyan parents with deep ties to Salafi jihadist movements. His father had fought with the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group. Hashem and his older brother Salman grew up in Manchester, attending local schools while both drifted toward radical Islamist ideology. Both had fought briefly alongside Islamist militias in Libya during the 2011 civil war. In 2014, they were evacuated back to the UK by the Royal Navy. Contact with ISIS operatives in Libya had already been made. The bomb was already being conceived. Between 2016 and April 2017, Hashem worked alongside Salman to build the device. He persuaded acquaintances to purchase chemicals for manufacturing TTP explosive. He sourced metal drums for bomb prototypes. He bought a Nissan Micra, used to store components, and helped manufacture the explosive material himself. On April 15, 2017, both brothers flew to Libya. Salman returned alone on the evening of May 22, 2017, as thousands of young people streamed from Manchester Arena following an Ariana Grande concert. Salman Abedi detonated the device in the city room foyer. 22 individuals were taken, including children as young as 8. Over 1,000 were injured. Hashem was arrested in Libya the following day. Extradited to the UK in July 2019, he refused to attend his trial and refused to attend his sentencing. On August 20th, 2020, at the Old Bailey, Hashem Abedi was convicted of 22 counts of murder, attempted murder, and conspiracy to cause an explosion. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 55 years, the longest minimum term ever imposed by a British court. In April 2025, while in custody, he attacked prison officers by pouring boiling cooking oil on them and stabbing them with makeshift weapons, hospitalizing 3 staff.